for life.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're in the home stretch, so bear with us for a little bit longer. Before we get underway, and before all of you put lots of sarcastic tweets up there about our ages, no, none of us are millennials, but that doesn't mean that we don't have the right to get them to pay for stuff. So we're going to get to the payment side in a little while, but I thought I'd just provide each of our panelists with a bit of an opportunity to say who they are, what their business is, and very briefly say how they're connected to this topic. Because the fortunate part about this panel is that there are four very, very esteemed panelists here who are each going to come at this from a slightly different perspective. So if we could start with you, Philip, first of all, just really briefly what you do and how you're connected with millennials.
Hi everyone, my name is Philip. Singapore wanted to engage better with young people, so they built this building called Scape in the middle of Orchard Road. And then they got crazy people to run it, like among them myself. So I set up a 10,000 square feet new media studios there, so the young people chat online and meet here, and we do interesting things with them, including fundraising, finding their talent, etc. Prior to this, I was with Singtel. I worked on the Mio TV project and launched it in 2007. So, and then this was, of course, a very natural transition for me.
Thank you. Jihi?
Hi everyone, my name is Jihi, and I'm not a millennial. I've been at MTV now for 6 years trying to understand how millennials work and how they think. And my side of the business is dealing with digital media, so any other screen beyond the television, I'll be in charge of.
Great. Daniel?
Yes, my name is Daniel Alec from Sony Music. I work on the digital side of the business, so trying to identify any new online or mobile partners with which we can engage and excite our millennial clients.
And finally, Jared.
Hi, I'm Gerald Smith. I head up the business within the Animal Group, which is called Animal Worldwide Brands in Asia. For those who don't know, Animal is a television producer of shows like Big Brother, Wipeout, Deal or No Deal, Fear Factor. What we're doing under the EWB, Animal Worldwide Brands, is extend everything beyond our activities beyond the TV set. So it's digital for a large part, but it's also events, gaming, merchandising. So I think, especially on the digital side, it connects with the millennials here.
So I think digital is a word that's going to come up quite a lot in this discussion, at least. But just so you're all clear, I mean, from our perspective, millennials are kids who were born after 1980, or not kids any longer, and they kind of tap out at about 1996. We don't really know what they're called if you were born in 97. Yeah, maybe we can coin a phrase for that. Millennials, I've heard it said, the Pew Research did some research in the States, and admittedly this was millennials over 18, so it's only about half of them, but it said they're expressive. 3/4 of them have a profile on social network. I'm sure that that's more than that now. 1 in 5 have posted a video online. They're creative. They're indulgent, and this is particularly in the States. 25% have a tattoo. More than half have more than one. They're rebellious. 1/4 have a piercing somewhere other than on their ear. But they're private because 70% say that they have a tattoo where you can't see it. And interestingly also, most have also, if they've got a Facebook page, they've established privacy settings on it. So they're an interesting group of people. Jihi, in your business, who are millennials and what makes them different to audiences which Viacom used to address?
Well, I mean, our definition of millennials is very similar to what you just mentioned, but we do define millennials as anybody born between 1980 and 1996. And we do address millennials in a wide, all over the world, basically. So, that brings up the interesting question, are they the same all over the world, or are they separated by region? What makes them tick? And the biggest difference that we have now at Viacom is that 6-7 years ago, the word digital within the company was, an up-and-coming buzzword, but it's now becoming much more integrated within the business. And especially this year, and I believe next year, it's sort of like an influx, an inflection point for us in the business model overall, because we're finding that instead of digital being a separate part of the business, a little bit separated from what the TV screen was doing, it's becoming much more integrated, and we're looking into packaging the content much more and delivering it in multi-platform. So it is becoming quite a challenge in terms of finding new revenue models, setting up a business model for this, and also making sure that we're still relevant with our audience on a day-to-day basis.
So, I mean, a lot of those words, Daniel, relevance, an audience, very similar to baby boomers and Gen Ys, right? So why are these guys different? Is it just technology, or is it the way that they use the technology?
I think if you're like me, when you look at a lot of the research, you find yourself questioning some of the data points, and you say, is this really different from when I was a teenager, when I was 13 or 14? The conclusion I've come to is the following, that I think that I'm of the opinion that the attitudes are probably very similar to other teenagers and other generations, but I think the behaviors are a bit different. And so what do I mean by that? Well, obviously there's just a proliferation of data that they have access to, information that they have access to, which is something that other teenagers did not have. But at the same time, what they do have is a limited amount of time to sort through that data and make it useful. So, I think I'm of the opinion that the way that they source through that data and who they rely on to get the truth is definitely changing. So they're relying more on their friends, the opinions of their friends, and to a lesser extent blogs, and but I think that's where the social element is really powerful. And we as a music company are trying to find ways to insert ourselves into that equation so we can add a voice.
So this is like, and this is a question to all of you, right? And this is a fundamental question. Can you persuade a millennial, right? Are there ways of actually persuading them that you couldn't persuade their parents? Or conversely, could you have persuaded their parents in a way that these kids or these young adults won't have a bar of it? Anyone want to deal with that? Gerald, can you persuade a millennial?
I don't know. Let me go back to what your initial question. I think the big difference, at least the way I see it, is the technology gives us new tools, and thus it gives also the millennials or the Generation Y new tools. So yes, there are new channels in which you can communicate with them, and thus hopefully persuade them. I think for us, Endemol is a content creation company. We are a creative company. We create and produce content, and we want to engage and entertain. So for us, it's a very exciting time now with all these new technologies coming in. It's a lot of new channels to engage an audience.
But is the essence of a millennial is that they're essentially distrustful of those commercial messages, and they need to be told by a friend that it's worth doing or worth consuming?
But then you think of it very much from a commercial point of view, whereas again, we come from the creative point of view. So for us, it's first and foremost about engaging the audience, and thinking about that is just great if you have so many other tools to extend, let's say, an experience which we first brought to the TV screen. Now we can extend into other platforms. So in that sense, of course, after that, you have to think about monetization, but I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later.
We'll get to that. We're going to get to the money in a minute. I just want to ask Philip, in your experience, Philip, and what influences the millennials in your installation to consume? Is it the technology? Is it their friends? What makes them make these decisions about how they use their time?
I guess in trying to answer that question, I'm just thinking for the benefit of everyone here today as well, because everyone is trying to figure out how to monetize the youth sector, right, and how to get them to buy more, use more, and consume more of your products and support that. So I think that persuasion has three levels. First is influence, first is to inform, to let them know about something. Second is influence, and thirdly is to instigate to action. Perhaps one of my more successful execution was we were supposed to have a major launch event on a Sunday, and I went online and we managed to mobilize about 1,000 young people to come down to an event and to do a flash mob within 8 days from Monday to Sunday. So that was a pretty fun thing to do, to be able to instigate to such action and execute it over a week. But I think that to answer the question about whether or not you can persuade one of these young people, I think the answer would be absolutely yes, but the answer would also be absolutely no. Absolutely yes, because I think their opinions are made up not by what we are trying to tell them, but by the influences within their communities and their group. So if you are able to influence the influencers, then technically speaking, you can change their opinion, right? But if you're not able to find the influences within those social network communities, then there's nothing you can do to do that. I think the recent elections in Singapore was a very good example of how things evolve, because big government usually use main media, but when it comes to elections, everybody was making up their mind based on what was online, what was through SMSs, etc. So this is a good learning experience for us. What are the methodologies of approaching these millennials?
So
Can I just, sorry, yes, from our perspective, from MTV, I think the answer to the question is a yes and a no. You can persuade them, and I guess we're sort of lucky that we are very concentrated and we do have a niche market, a particular market and a particular audience that we do go after, or that we are with. So it's not that difficult to persuade that audience to come to us and rally around a piece of content or a theme or a music, which is the universal language that we have at MTV or Viacom overall. So, but I also think it's extremely important that you do recognize that these guys are the influencers, and you have to really get to the core of what it is that they want. They don't have a lot of time. They have a short attention span, not because they have ADD, but because they have so much choice as to how they can connect with that same piece of content, whether it be on a mobile, social network, on a clip, on the television, on an iPad, or whatever else that you do have.
I'd like to take a perspective from on this issue as well. I mean, I would agree that it is possible to influence. I mean, even though there's this proliferation of content and opinions that are available, you can still have a voice. And I think the key of having a voice is, again, understanding what are the behaviors that characterize this demographic. And if you look at the behaviors, so for example, for social media, if you look at the times of day that people access, especially millennials access their Facebook pages, it's a very interesting pattern, right? So you see a peak in the very, very early morning. I think if you look at the data, I recall it was something like 33% of people check their Facebook page. It's like the first thing in the morning, right? And so there are certain peaks throughout the day. So that's early morning, there's late afternoon, about 11 o'clock, and then a little bit around 4 o'clock, and then it peaks again right before bed. And so what does this suggest? Well, this suggests that certain times of the day that you have those windows of opening. So first, obviously, understand who the demographic is, understand what the behaviors are, right? And then you can do your targeted messaging throughout. There's another very interesting article on Mashable maybe about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it was talking about for different brands, what days of the week are the most impactful if you're going to do a tweet or a post on Facebook. So for example, if you're a fashion brand, you want to do that posting on a Thursday. If you're a restaurant, it was like on a Tuesday, something like that. It was very, very interesting. But again, it's all based on those core behaviors. There's a lot of good companies which do that research. Sony Music has definitely spoken with a number of them. But when you speak with partners, whether it's telcos or brands or, there's some pretty good assumptions that they can make as well in terms of who their core demographic is and when they think are the peak times for being receptive to content.
So this is interesting, isn't it? Because if they are open to being persuaded, right, and that they are relying on the power of their friends for recommendation, how dangerous is it for brands and for content in the sense that that means they're also open to negative messages, right? Messages that you can't necessarily control. So how difficult is it to actually have that element of control out there in the marketplace with a millennial, or do you just have to put up with wherever that message might go?
I'll take the first crack at that, just to follow up. I mean, I think it is potentially quite dangerous. You know, there's almost a kind of this paradox of privacy. When you look at social media, there's so much private information available. I think where millennials in particular get upset is when they feel that brands are using that private information and trying to do targeted selling. And so that's when brands lose trust. They lose the sense of authenticity. Now the good thing is, of course, I think millennials are forgiving. But you know, it's a very delicate balance. If you look at there's other data which suggests that, you know, why do people friend a brand? The data suggests it's a slightly female skew, and about 33% of it are doing it in a very transactional way, in that I will like a brand, but in return I want you know, a discount on a product or a promotion, something like that. So I think the more transparent you can be in terms of the intentions, I think the better off. I think that where a lot of us get tripped up sometimes is where we try to get too creative. We try to insert ourselves places where we shouldn't be. Whereas I think if we're more straightforward, we can have a more trusting and a more enduring relationship with millennials.
Yeah, and that speaks to the point also. I think that I agree with you that they are very forgiving, and that comes from building a relationship with them. It's not about pushing them information. It's not about forcing them this and that. It's about telling them straightforward how it is, what it is, and then, you know, they have the right to come back to you. I mean, we've got shows that are very controversial, some of them, you know, for Asia, and they tell us straight away, I watched that show and it sucks. You know, I don't think it speaks to what my friends and I believe in. I think you should take it off air, and I don't want to see it, you know, provided here or there, or, you know, so it depends on also what sort of relationship you build with your audience, which I think it's extremely important to making sure that you keep them with you and that goes back to what you're saying, which is being transparent with them.
So I think that speaks to the marketing message, right? And delivering on the engagement. But in terms of the actual engagement itself, you know, what are the implications for content now? If you're delivering content to a millennial, how rich does that experience have to be? And then eventually, how much more expensive is it to do that, to say address content to, say, a Gen Y? Gerald?
Yeah, going back to what you said, Daniel, about research, I think it's quite interesting. You know, there's so much research from, let's say, non-millennials about millennials, right? And probably we're the example here, talking about them without being it. I heard about, I think a year ago, 2 years ago, I thought it was very interesting. There was a research Morgan Stanley wanted to do about Generation Y, and they had no clue actually where to start. And so they asked the summer intern, a 15-year-old boy, could you help us out? Where do we start? And he actually went out and talked to his friends and interviewed people, et cetera, in his own social environment. And the paper that came out was so good that Morgan Stanley decided to publish it. It's a little bit old now. I think it's end of 2009. But it was very interesting insight. And the main conclusion was very simple, actually. It was, yes, we are very, very interested in media. Actually, they consume more media than before, yeah, but in an entirely different way. And a different way is, you know, the standard things like no ads. Well, we don't want to pay. You have to realize this is younger demographic. This is, you know, teenagers. And the paying will come in later, I think, when they grow up a little bit. But it was about that. It was, yes, we are very interested in media. And again, entirely different ways is because they have access to so many more different channels through technology.
So if you're a content producer, how do you deliver a rich experience with no ads and without any payment?
Right. Well, so for us, it's very important to understand that we are a business-to-business company. So we have to, in a way, have to worry about it less than, say, the channels, because we don't do the direct sales. At the same time, of course, we are, as I said, we are engaging. We are about entertaining our audience. So for us, it's extending the experience, basically. And I think the other day, and I think it was mentioned before, yesterday, and maybe even today, what is a great example of extending experience, or brand, if you will, is what Lady Gaga has been doing the last week, I believe, with opening Gagaville within Farmville, and unlocking new songs there. I think very, very powerful, very different. I think she is the #1 on Twitter artist, 10 million Twitter followers. So what she does is she extends an existing brand, which is already out there, people are already interested, into different channels. And thereby, the experience gets richer. And I think for Animal, that's the key. What we would like to do is use all the new technology to give a richer experience and also a longer experience in that sense,
So for Viacom, Jihi, is this a good problem to have or a bad problem?
It's a bit of both. For us, like I said before, we're sort of lucky that we do concentrate on making really great content for youth, and we have a very definitive target audience for the MTV channel. So it all starts with a good piece of content, and out of that, now that there are so many more distribution platforms that we do have to go through, the ad sales model, to some extent, does subsidize our cost of sales in making sure when we deliver content, it is done in the right way, in the right formats. And there are many, many formats. And now you're getting to HD, high res, low res. Is it going to be a clip? Is it going to be long form, the whole season, etc.? So it is getting more challenging in terms of ROI from a revenue and OI perspective. But I think that for us, the way that we deal with that now, and it's working really well, is that, like I mentioned before, we go out and we package the experience, and we do get sponsorship behind it, and that solves a lot of those problems for now.
So in your experience, was there stuff that worked for Viacom that you were pleasantly surprised with? That there was that there were ways of engaging this audience in ways that millennials actually found attractive and was for you was a good message?
I think there are always are, but the thing is that you can never guess what's going to work and what's not. From my perspective, I sit down with a team and we come up with ideas, and what I think, there's no way this is going to work, we end up getting huge amounts of response for it. What I think, wow, I finally got a really cool idea, I connect with these people, and it's totally throws me off the loop, and we fail miserably at. So I think it's like I said before, it's having a relationship with these kids and just trying different things all the time, and it's also in part them appreciating that we do try really hard and also coming back with a lot of feedback, so the next time we may not make the same mistakes.
So Philip, is it about authenticity, like kids respond positively to an authentic attempt to engage them as opposed to an overtly commercial attempt?
Actually, for just like to check with the audience and the panel also, relation to the question, we mentioned audience, we mentioned them, we mentioned the kids, we mentioned the millennials. It's always the other person. So what is the other person? Interesting thing. We refer to them as audience, but I have an hypothesis to make, and I don't know whether this might be an interesting one. It's just an original thought and idea, that maybe today what we are dealing with is something quite different from our generation. I thought of a word, it's called a network consciousness. Network consciousness. There are various units of consciousness out there in young people, and they are all networked together, and they operate on almost a biological system. My 12-year-old daughter called me and told me one morning that, hey, there's an earthquake in Japan. She had the consciousness plugged in before I did, because I watch it on CNN, but she got it off the internet or a tweet or something. And it occurred to me that they exist as almost a biological system. Now, if you think about it from that perspective, then maybe how we treat them is different. Because in our generation, you could do a campaign, a marketing and advertising, in order to change their behavior, correct? But in this new way, I mean, how do you talk to a person, a biological person? You use symbols, you use arguments, use persuasion, you know, and give 2 points of view and let them make the decision themselves. Because, and once the decision is made on a whole mass of people, and they are a network consciousness, then their minds switch, you know, into a different format, different paradigm, and then you can then, you know, have a dialogue with them on that basis. I think perhaps, you know, for all of us in the industry, it's useful to start to change our concept model of what this next generation is. They are not discrete individuals to be convinced. They are a full entity to be dealt with, you know, and to be worked against, not worked against, worked with. Yeah, just an idea.
I think that sets us up really well for the discussion which we need to have, which is this organism, right? This organism that relies on each other more than it relies on the outside world. How do you get them to pay for stuff? Right? Where is the monetization hook in this? Question to you, Daniel, because you all tapped into the research. Do millennials have a willingness to pay?
That's a good question, and it's one that I think the answer varies by country, right? When you look at most countries in what we call Asia, I would say there's generally speaking a willingness to pay, not always an ability to pay. But you know, I'd rather have that. There are countries in Asia. There's one very large country I can think of where I feel it's the opposite. I think there's an ability, but not necessarily a willingness. I think that's the more difficult challenge to overcome. You know, as long as there's a willingness to pay, you know, the challenge for us, or the trap that we tend to fall into is, you know, we try different models, we see one that works, and we try to repeat that, and that's where things slip up, because we'll run a campaign that does really, really well with one artist or one release. We'll try that with a second one, and it'll bomb. And so, you know, I think that the challenge is it's not so much cost, whether it's more expensive, it's how can we be more creative than the last one? And how can we not use a concept which was successful, which is awfully tempting, but how can we take a concept, make a few twists, and make it new?
To me, this is the point of differentiation, right? Because I read somewhere that millennials don't respect traditional value. They'll pay for things, but they won't pay for the same things or for the same reasons, nor in the same way as their parents, right? And I think that the Gaga example on Farmville is very, you know, she's doing that to make money, right? And kids are paying for stuff on Farmville in microtransactions. So there is a willingness and an ability to pay. But how do you encourage millennials to pay? And what new opportunities do these monetization opportunities do these new experiences give you, Gerald?
I think the answer is definitely yes. They are willing to pay. It's all about alternatives. I have to grab back in an experience. I come from the digital space and not from the TV space. I used to run a gaming company, and I remember during the dot-com crash, we used to have a very healthy model with games and advertising. Then during the crash, the advertisers just didn't want to pay anymore, so we kind of had to swap into a pay-to-play model. And then we did a research of all our users. We had 400,000 gamers, and we asked them, "Are you willing to pay, and how much?" And that's obviously the dumbest question ever, right? Because if they're used to playing for free, and then you ask them how much you want to pay from now on, everybody said no. So we did it anyway because we had to, which was actually a very wise lesson, because we had a 25% conversion, which was much more than we ever expected. So the thing is, you know, it's all about alternatives, and obviously this generation Y, the millennials, have a lot of alternatives through all these different means, different channels. So you have to be smart about it and think, you know, what do they want actually? And if you can give them what they want, I believe that, you know, they are willing to pay. Of course, there's different payment models, you know, whether it be sponsoring or etc. micropayments. But yes, the fact that there's 2 billion going on in the social gaming industry on micropayments on virtual goods, that is money. I mean, serious money.
There's definitely real money there, Jihi. Has this given you at Viacom the opportunity to dip into pots that you have not previously been able to touch with linear networks?
Yes, the answer is yes. But we don't have a transactional relationship with our audience per se. We do work with partners and clients who do pay to actually ride on our relationship and the connection that we have with our audience, to sell product X, Y, and Z. So to that extent, we're not that directly. But I think that, on the other hand, it's also the edge of a knife, basically, because you've got the trust and you're working with them, you're building a relationship. And on the other hand, well, not so much the other hand, but you're also working with partners and clients who want to take advantage of that relationship to make sure that they're associated with you and the brand to make those people open up their pockets and actually pay for a product.
So is this, in your experience, a lot more transactions, a lot more smaller transactions more often in your business? Are you filling up smaller buckets now?
It depends on the market. For far more advanced countries on a digital sense, like Korea, for example, where transactional models they've gone, very advanced, and they do have it's very easy to do a microtransaction. Yes, we have gone down that route. For other markets that are less developed, we do bigger chunks of sponsorship, like I say, in ad sales.
And Gerald, for you, in developing a format now, are you consciously thinking about monetization opportunities outside the show itself, and do you build that into the program?
Not directly monetization models, to be honest. Again, because we are a creative company and we are a business-to-business company. I think what we're coming from is how we can engage them better. And so if you look at what they want, it's a lot about personalization, customization, social. They're looking for gaming, which is very engaging. So we are trying, as a company, to move our content from traditional TV shows into those spaces. So to give you an example, we have a new game show which is doing very well in Europe. It came out of the UK. It's called the Money Drop, or the £1 Million Drop in the UK, for those who are familiar with the market. And it's a classic game show, but right now we offer the audience to play along, a live play along. So through your iPad, iPhone, or whatever device, people can sit in the living room and play the same exact game that is on TV. You probably all know the experience from when you're watching a game show and you go, oh, I knew that question, I could have won that million. We're now bringing it to the people, and it serves a lot of different ways. It's not only makes the show more engaging, it has a longer lifespan because after the show, people can keep on playing online or whatever device. We use it as a recruitment tool as well. So we had I think 20,000 people. We said, if you are doing well on the live play along, you can be invited to play in the studio next week. And the other model is about monetization is then the live play along is a free to play, but we're then trying to engage them further into standalone games, social games, etc., which have monetization models with it.
Okay, now Daniel, I don't want to upset you because I know you're in the music industry, and I'm going to ask you a question about monetization. So brace yourself, friend. But for you, in terms of what you're attempting to achieve with Sony Music now, are you being successful in developing monetization models which weren't there? We were talking earlier about social gaming, and that came out of nowhere. Is in the music industry, what is the strategy for Sony Music in trying to develop monetization specifically at this audience?
Yeah, good question. We're within Sony Music, we're looking very closely at social games, and just as you said, looking at transactions which are more recent, more frequent, but smaller in size. Right, and so what that means is that as a content owner, I think unfortunately we're going to have to become comfortable with maybe smaller revenue shares, but more of more transactions. It's just the way that we're going. So we're looking very closely what we can do with online games in a variety of ways. So that's not just about licensing background music, which is maybe what we were doing 2 years ago, 1 year ago. Now we're looking at how can we take these artists, which we represent, how can we license their name and likeness? How can we involve them in virtual merchandise, things like that? So there's a lot of attention right now about how we can take these assets which we have and really monetize them in these virtual worlds.
So it seems like all of you are, to some extent, getting out of what used to be your core business, right? And you're all talking about doing things that 3 or 4 years ago you didn't do. Is, as a consequence of all of this, is the pie going to grow? It costs to address this audience. Are the revenues going to justify the investment? Jihi?
Yes, I think so. I think that the pie is going to grow. It's just a matter of navigating it well, and just, at the risk of sounding boring and generic, doing what we do really well and keep doing that for as long as you can.
So it's authenticity.
Ian, may I make a comment on Daniel's point?
You may.
I think we all should learn from the music industry to cannibalize ourselves, to provide a viable legal alternative before the market does. I remember in Singtel back in 98, 99, we licensed digital rights management technology, and I was, running everywhere from Bertelsmann to Sony to everybody, trying to discuss digital music distribution and willing to pay good money for minimum guarantees and all that. But in those days, the decision was no, we are selling by albums, single tracks, no, we prefer intertrust DRM versus A-track 3, etc. And nothing worked. We couldn't get any deals done. Very little deals, 30, 40 tracks. Until the industry became, ran away, and the market ran away with it. And when everything is free and you ask people to pay, it's an insult to intelligence of the young people to say, now you've got to pay for it. That's what I mentioned. And even up till recent years, right, we were offering things like, okay, let's put a minimum guarantee of $1 million on the table for unlimited DRM-free music, right? And the answer was no. HQ hasn't agreed on that. And then, 1 year later, everything was DRM-free. And, you missed the whole opportunity to pick up a 6-digit number for a small market like Singapore. So I feel that industry needs to move quickly and challenge ourselves internally, right? And then you can catch the next wave and monetize the content before it all changes again. So, yeah.
Philip, I think that really, to finish with this, because I wanted to finish with accountability, right? Because you guys, it seems to me that there's a feedback loop with this audience, with these millennials, which is very fast. And so what does it imply to you in terms of how you're accountable to that audience, but also how you're accountable to your advertising and other commercial partners? How fast do you now have to be? If it's working, do more of it. If it's not working, stop. Daniel?
Yes, the accountability, I think the onus is on us. I think a lot of us are in very, very sexy, very cool industries, right? Let's face it. But the reality is not to get caught up in that. And the reality is to make a service and be truthful and say, this is what we are. Yes, you still want to sell the sizzle with the steak, right? You still want to sell the sexiness, but we can't rely just on that. We have to go to where the consumers are, and we have to try a variety of models, and be okay that some will work and some won't, and be okay that some will have a high revenue share and some will have a low revenue share. And I think the quicker we can get used to that flexibility, that's the way we evolve.
Okay, well, I wish you, all 4 of you, the best in trying to monetize, to get those millennials to pay. We're actually out of time, but we did want to provide some opportunity for Q&A, but I'm getting the wind up. So could you all thank the panel, please? And we'll be available outside if any of you had any specific questions. So thank you very much.